Hey guys, BJ the Brave here, back with some more Shadowverse content for you. We are about 2 weeks away now, I think, from our first ever balance patch for Shadowverse Worlds Beyond, and I thought I'd make a video today to just basically give my thoughts on kind of like where I think the games are, and certainly some of the things that I'd love to see changed. I wouldn't say it's necessarily me guessing what the patch is going to be, but certainly highlighting some of the things that I think me and a lot of members in the community feel would improve the game. Like I say, cards that might need a bit of a nerf, and kind of try and give a bit of context and background to those thoughts as well. So let's jump in. What I'm going to do, guys, I'm actually just going to start with the neutral cards and work through each faction and pick out a few. Now, obviously, when we get this balance patch, we'll have had 3 different sets, right? And I think that it's probably fair to say that obviously there are some cards that just don't see play, right? So my focus really in terms of buffs, I'm going to be quite broad on the buffs today. I think the main thing would be that, you know, the devs can look at the stats, they can look at the raw data, they can see which cards are just completely unplayed in ranked. And to try and kind of push those cards a little bit, you know. So that can be, you know, minor changes, maybe making a 7-drop cost 6, maybe buffing the stats slightly. They don't have to be significant, because the problem is you can kind of swing cards from one extreme to another. You also don't want to completely redesign cards, because if you're going to do that, you might as well release it as part of a new expansion, right? So it's kind of a waste of design effort in terms of return on investment. So I get why devs don't love doing that. But personally, I think tweaking the numbers a little bit is quite an easy fix, and it can, you know, as a gamer and as a deck builder, it can kind of incentivize you to try some new things. Now, when it comes to the neutral cards, let's talk about... I actually think the neutral set is in a decent place. I think we have some excellent examples of good neutral cards, and those would be, you know, things like Phildau, Ruby, Indomitable Fighter, Leia. I think these cards, they have like a generic good effect, right? So in other words, the thing they bring to your deck fits into a multitude of decks, and that's kind of what you want from a neutral card. What I also love about these, and this, you're going to see how this ties in when I talk about nerfs, is that none of the cards I just mentioned, none of them sort of lead to, you know, just being able to sort of burst your opponent down and win the game instantly. They help you with controlling the board, controlling your hand, gaining tempo, gaining card advantage, all key mechanics that you know, a strategic player is looking for to get an edge over the opponent. So I think they're really some good examples of well-designed cards. I think as we go through, the first culprit potentially for a nerf is Gilneas. Now, obviously Gilneas has only just come out in the 3rd set, and he has and I think it's a little bit early, but one thing we do know already is that Gilneas is in pretty much in every meta deck. And I feel like it's just doing a little bit too much. Like, you can play this card down on 3, right? And you can clear an early, say you're playing aggro, you can just clear an early 2 health unit. And then it's just stuck on the board. And then what do? Do they keep going face and knowing that this thing could Evo next turn and just get the health back? No, they have to attack it. So it's another 3 health, essentially, like giving your warlord, your leader another 3 health, essentially, right, that they've got to get rid of before they can keep beating you down. So it works really well like that. And that's like the worst case scenario, right? Like, obviously, when you're bringing this down on 5, you can kill like 3 units. You can bring it down on 6, Super Evo. It's just got so many uses. And then, of course, in the late game, the fact that it's got the fanfare with the sweetness of veracity, which gives you essentially reach into the end game. I think that's absolutely phenomenal. So how would I change this? I think it's just doing too much. I actually think changing the cost of this wouldn't actually help too much. Like, maybe you could change the sweetness of veracity to like 6 or 7, so that your opponent couldn't play 2 of them in one turn. That's one option for a very minor tweak. But I feel like the card's just doing a bit too much. Personally, I'd like to kind of see it just be a little bit less flexible. If we want it to be a healer, maybe get rid of the sweetness of veracity. Maybe, yeah, that's one thing that, you know, that could definitely happen. The other thing we could do is we could try to try to tame the drain a little bit. Like, one thing I wondered was, what if it said something like, this card can't Super Evo? You know, what if it could only evolve, for example? Would that tame it a little bit? Like, you know, the turn that it comes on to get the heal, it's only going to get 4, and then it's actually going to probably die maybe against the thing it trades against. That could be another alternative. But for me, this is one of the cards that just needs a little bit taming, and I think it's just doing a little bit too much for me at the minute. I think the next card in the neutral that we need to keep an eye on is Jerabane. Now, obviously, I think Jerry's brought a lot of fun to this set, especially as, you know, as the meta got settled quite early on. You know, it might have been already feeling a little bit dull for some people, and the Jerry's kind of injected a bit of life. So I think we got to be careful with this card. I don't think it's broken by any means. I think it's fun in the way it's designed, and it adds flexibility. I did think about maybe the crest would say something like deal 1 damage to your leader at the start of each turn, so it almost puts you on a ticking time bomb as well. So you're kind of having that race with trying to get the Reaper card, the victory card, versus you dying. But I don't know whether it'd just be not worth it at that point. You know, if you're taking, I don't know, 10 health over 10 turns, it could just be too much. Like I said, I'm not sure that this one needs to get nerfed in this particular balance patch. But it's one for us to keep an eye on, definitely. If every single meta deck starts running Jerry, then, you know, it might be time to look at it. Now, one card, the next card that I think needs to be looked at is Odin. And I think, if I'm honest, out of the neutral set, I think probably more than any card, this is the card that needs doing something to. Because, I mean, it's just a super powerful card, right? Like, it's kind of got the removal and the storm. That combination is lethal. Storm is without doubt the most powerful ability in the game, in my opinion, because it just bypasses so many of the rules of a card game, right? Like the meta right now is at a point where, like, having a board is almost irrelevant, and I think that's a really, really bad place to be this early on in the game's lifespan, right? Like, you know, it should be about establishing board and you know, sort of playing strategically to try and wield a slight advantage over your opponent on the board. And it's just not really like that at the minute. This, as you see as we go through this, there's so many cards that just enable you to almost ignore the board and still win the game from hand. And Odin's introduction in set 2 was one of the main culprits and one of the biggest things that kind of like started to dial up this approach. I just feel like, for me, the easy fix for Odin, or the easy tweak at this stage, would just be to increase. You know, you could just make it cost 8. That's one. It's not going to stop the fundamental problem, but it would potentially just delay. You know, just delay what it's doing. Also, at 7, it then means that it can be followed up by so many powerful 8 drops like Cerberus in Abysscraft, or Gaia in Dragon, or you know, Amalia in Swordcraft, for example. So you know, then you can go from Amalia, you can go into what's his name on 9 and just win, and Albert. And I think that's the issue. It's like at 7, it's just. This storm curve is just insane, right? Like Forte on 6 and then Odin on 7. I think making it 8 would make it just like a little bit more awkward to play, and particularly combining it with the other kind of big sort of beat down from hand card. So that would be the simplest thing. But I still wonder whether that will be enough, because as I say, it's a really powerful effect. The other thing is, what's interesting is that I think its fanfare ability is really interesting. I think being able to banish an enemy card is actually a great ability. It's totally unique right now. There's nothing else that can banish an enemy card. There's things that can banish an enemy follower, but not an enemy card, right? So being able to deal with amulets and all that type of thing, I do think makes this ability really cool. I just think combining it with Storm is just insane. Like, you're giving it a control tool and you're giving it a beatdown tool. To me, I'd almost like to see these things separated out into other cards, as opposed to given to the same card. But I do feel if we're going to give it Storm, you know, you could even make this 3 attack instead of 4. Or you could make this similar to the idea I had earlier, which is that this card can't super evo. You know, that you know, maybe you can only evo it. Maybe that's another way. But personally, I'd like to see it go up to 8 first, and then see kind of what happens from there. There is a potential kind of like argument for touching Cocytus, but I feel like we're not quite. The game hasn't quite hit a place where all we've seen is control decks and everyone's leaning into Cocytus. It can get a bit like that, and particularly where spell boost is obviously so good. But I think actually, don't think this card is necessarily the problem, and it's nice that there's a neutral kind of end game. It's good, like free-to-play players can build good control decks around it. So for me, I'm kind of thinking that Cocytus gets a pass for now. But I think Odin is the absolute main culprit and the main thing that I want to see, you know, that I want to see go. So yeah. Okay, so let's now take a look at Forestcraft. Okay, so Forestcraft for me is one of the classes that has, you know, a very clear identity, you know. And one of the things that's quite nice is the amount of very cheap sort of combo, cheap cards, right, that you can combo together. Whether it's removal, like the ambush, or like playing out loads of units and playing things like Twinkle Toes. Yeah, it just means that there's lots and lots of combinations you can put together. So what is pushing Forest over the edge at the minute? To be honest with you, the biggest thing really with Forest is the combo roach deck, but I feel like it's just such a high skill cap that I don't have a massive problem right now with like roach. I don't know that we need to balance it. People have talked about the Godwood staff being potentially, you know, potentially something that could get changed. Maybe you could push this up to 4 cost, for example, if we do think there's a bit of a problem with the roach stats. But I'd be curious to see, like, from the devs' perspective, what the stats are showing them in terms of the win rates and whatnot. Because personally, I feel like it's such a hard deck to master that even though the power ceiling's high, I don't have a massive problem with it. The other question for me is Bale. I wonder whether this could say something like reduce the cost of this card by 1 down to a minimum of 1, right? So that it could never become 0. Because actually, to be honest, like if you did something like that, that could actually be that in itself would be a major change to the combo roach. So maybe doing something like that. I've also heard other people say maybe just making Bale cost more, so it can still go to 0, but maybe making it making this like 9 or 10 as a start would mean that a lot of the times combo roach can't go off quite as early as it does, and it might need an extra turn or 2, which obviously can make a massive difference. So I think one of those tweaks would make sense for Bale. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with where Forest is at. So let's talk about Sword. Now, Sword, I think, has been a dominant force throughout, particularly the first 2 sets. I think the third set is it's strong, but I think because of the way the game's changed, it has changed the nature of Sword. What makes me a little bit sad is that Sword is, you know, it's meant to be the kind of on the board deck, right? And that is very much how it played in the first 2 seasons, the first 2 sets, right? It was like the best value stuff you could put down on the board. It could go wide really quickly, could refill if it got controlled. It sort of had these, you know, cheap removals. Just a really good sort of class at fighting for board. But what's happened now is I feel like some of the really good cards like Gildaria, like Gildaria is a really good card, but Gildaria, what it does is it controls the board. It doesn't storm your opponent down. It doesn't beat your opponent down from hand. The biggest broken thing about Gildaria is getting extra super evos, which, yeah, I feel like that is pretty crazy. I did wonder whether it should say something like evolve this follower instead of super evolve this follower at Rally 20. That's definitely one way we could tame Gildaria. But the crazy thing is, guys, this has gone from being the most busted card in Swordcraft in set 2 to not even played at the minute. And the reason it's not played is because you've got this card, Sincero, who essentially does a similar thing. It helps you clear the board, but it's also doing the damage to face. So it's combining with this Storm problem that I said I think the game's got at the minute. You know, we can play this, we can Super Evo. If it's got 4 loot cards on, that's doing 8 damage to board and 8 damage to face. That is way too busted, guys. Way too busted. There's no way this card can go untouched, in my opinion. Especially combining it with then Odin's and Albert's. It's just too much storm damage. And all of a sudden, the sword builds now, they don't even play for board. They're not even like, it's not even necessary to kind of dominate the board, because we can just, you know, stay on par, build this guy up, hit his Super Evo, follow it with Odin, follow it with Albert, it's game over. And I just think it's just way too much. It's a fundamental problem with where the game's at this early in its lifespan. What I would suggest is that Sincero gets changed, and I think we need to do something along the lines of either halving the amount of damage it's doing to face, or getting rid of that altogether. Maybe you make it just kind of like a board clear focus. That's one thing that you could do. Maybe you could even reduce the cost of it to 5 if you took away the face damage. But personally, I feel like you can't do 8 damage to the you can't do 8 damage to the board and 8 damage to face. I feel like it should say something like deal X damage to all enemy followers, and then deal, you know, half the damage to the enemy, you know, the enemy leader. Something like that might be a good starting point. But it's just way too powerful. And the fact that a card as broken as Gildaria doesn't even make it into decks at the minute just shows you, really does highlight the problem. Other than that, I mean, I really like the board building side of Sword. So for me, I feel like it's these things that are doing the face damage. So Sincero's a problem. I mean, Albert is, you know, it's quite iconic to the class. I don't know that we really want to change it. I think that being able to do 12 damage or 9 is obviously the big strategy that you're trying to pull off with this. Do I feel like that needs changing? I feel like the problem, as I've said before, is how all these things combine at the minute. Personally, I think if we touch Odin, if we deal with something with Sincero, then we maybe could leave Albert as it is. Otherwise, there, you know, you could argue that, you know, maybe you need to get rid of the 3 AoE, or you know, maybe you knock the attack down to 2, something like that. But I don't actually think Albert is really the problem, to be honest. It's the stuff that just is going to face that I have an issue with. Because most of the other powerful cards, when you look at them, you know, they really are about kind of like dominating the board. There's not too much in the sword that is contributing to that kind of like just go face damage. Yeah. So for me, Sincero is the big one, and we already talked about Odin. Next up, Runecraft. Now, Runecraft obviously has been dominating the meta now for a few seasons, and the fact that we just got a 3rd set and a set 2 deck around Runecraft is still the meta shows that this deck is absolutely broken. And the biggest thing that it revolves around, and there are a few things, but one of the things is that spell boost is just a bit uncapped. So one way that we could look to nerf spell boost is to just put caps on things. Like, for example, with William, do you say, you know, deal X damage to all followers, and it's X equals spell boost? But do we need to like have a cap on it? So yes, every time you spell boost, it increased by 1, but maybe it goes up to a maximum of 5, for example. So again, I don't really want to say exactly what the cap should be, but I do think that that is one way of taming these cards. Because, you know, think about Stormy Blast. This thing could do 27 damage. There's no cap on it. It's pretty insane. Whereas if this thing could do 5 damage for 1, that's still really good, right? I just feel like maybe the Storm boost is too insane. And the biggest thing in the Runecraft that I really want to see change, though, is Declimb. Declimb is just phenomenal. It's the biggest it's the biggest way of breaking the mana system, if you like, the player point costs and the player point system in the game, full stop, period. There's so many combinations, playing out Cocytus and then playing this next turn, so you can play out, you know, 1 or 2 Cocytus deck cards, then Declimb, and then play another 2 or 3, or it's game over. Just wins the game. We can play Kion 10, then we can play this, and we can play another one. We can play Carrion, then this, and then into Kakaitis. Or, I mean, it's just, there's so many broken combos, and it's just too much. I do like decks where you have to have, you get a payoff for controlling the board, but it's just too easy to control. They've got some of the best cards in the game for like, if they had some of the worst cards and then they had this kind of payoff at the end, that would make sense. But when you've got, you know, Norman on 6, one of the most broken cards, Carrion on 7, Anangria on 5, these are some of the best cards in the game at that cost. And speaking of which, let's talk about Anangria for a second. I feel like Anangria needs nerfing. Now, personally, I don't have a massive issue with the way, what it does on board, but it's the spell boost for me, which just tips this card over the edge. You can't have a card that's just so dominating at controlling the board, and then fast forwarding this this spell boost game plan. For me, that should just say spell boost your hand once. If you're going to have a spell boost element to it, I don't even know if it needs to be have a spell boost element, but if you want to keep it in that theme, then I think that needs to go down to 1 time. 3 times is absolutely insane, like playing this and getting your decline boosted and your William and you start, it's just too much. It's just too much. So for me, I think I would like to see this. And bear in mind, guys, I'm quite a fan of like tweaking, saying, well, let's touch it now and then maybe, you know, see how it does, look at the data, and then we can nerf it again. Like, rather than just taking a sledgehammer to it and making it completely useless, I'm much more of a fan of making more incremental changes when we talk about nerfs. So for me personally, I think just putting this down to spell boost 1 would dramatically affect so many of these spell boost combos that we're seeing, where they're just consistently going off on turn 9, turn 10, because they've got all the things spell boosted. And I think Anangria is a key part of that. So that's where I'd actually change Anangria, I think, to start with. There is an argument that you could make a 3 attack as well, potentially, so that even when she evos, she becomes a 5 instead of a 6. That's another tweak, but I think the biggest thing I'd like to see starting with is the spell boost. And then, as we said about Norman is just so good, guys. I mean, personally, I would probably like to see this change to restore 3 defense rather than 4. I just think the amount of heal that Rune has access to at the minute is absolutely bonkers. So maybe changing that to 3 heal. And then I think the other one that you could do as well is potentially make Sage like Teachings 3 heal as well. Although 4 for 3 is not, it seems more reasonable. Like, I just think the overall cumulative amount is just too much. Whereas if the heals were only doing 3 instead of 4, it just would mean there'd be more games where your opponent had a chance of like beating them down and winning before these crazy combos go off. Again, I'm talking about each of these cards in isolation, so we need to be careful, because if we make all of the nerfs on these, then the whole thing will unravel. So you need to think about, whenever you change a card, like how that relates to the others. So if they nerf Declimb, then maybe the heal will be fine, but if they don't nerf Declimb, then maybe they need to nerf the heals. For me, I think the Declimb itself, I feel like there's quite a few things you could do. So, for example, spell boosting your hand 5 times. Do you really need that? You're already redrawing your hand. Do you really need to spell boost it 5 times? Maybe that could be spell boost once. That would be a nice way of changing it. Fully recover your play points. One of the things I wondered is, do you recover half of your play points, or recover your full play points -2? So, like, say it's turn 10, you'd actually recover 8 play points, and then you wouldn't be able to play a Kakaitis or a Carrion. That could be cool. Still breaks the mana system. It'd still be a good card, but you would have to change the tactics. It wouldn't be quite as OP and broken as some of the things people are doing. The other thing you could do, which should just be really simple, is to just change the 18 and put it up to 20. Just make it harder to pull off. So it'd still do the same thing, but it might happen another turn or 2 later. So there's like 3 good options for how I think this card should or could be nerfed. Yeah, okay, they're the big ones I want to see in Rune. In terms of Dragon, I mean, honestly, I don't know that I really want to see anything nerfed to Dragon. I think that the big thing for me is I feel like the Louis Feng is potentially a target for a buff, because I just hate the fact that if we've got second term, this card's great as a ramp card, but if we're going first, it really is terrible. So, and I feel like that's not a good card design for ramp. Like, if you're talking about the ramp mechanic, you just need on 3 to draw your ramp card on 3. You need to draw your 4 on 4. And I feel like going first or second shouldn't be a factor in that. So I'd kind of like to maybe see a slight buff to Louis Fang, given that we've only got 2 ramp cards in the faction. The biggest one that people call out for in terms of a nerf would be Forte. I mean, just Intimidate with Forte can just lead to winning games. Like, I've played Forte, Super Evo, and our opponent's just got nothing. Just can't interact with it, right? Like, and I do like Intimidate. I wouldn't want to see this mechanic nerfed. I can see why people would be against it as a mechanic, because it's kind of uninteractive. But personally, I feel like it's a clever way of, like anyone who played Magic the Gathering, the blue always used to have flying units, and then if you weren't flying, you couldn't interact with them and things like that. I feel like it's a bit like that in a way, but for this game. And I think that what that does is it gives you like if you think about the game Rock, Scissors, Paper, it kind of gives you a different angle. So it deepens the kind of strategy and the ways in which you can go about designing decks. So I'd kind of like to see Intimidate kept, but I'm not sure how you nerf it. Personally, I don't want to see Forte nerfed in this one, because I think that Dragon have been underwhelming across the start of this game. If Dragon were dominating and this was like the tier 1 meta, yeah, fair enough, nerf Forte. But I think we can afford to let Forte go till the next balance patch and see how Dragon are doing. Other than that, I actually don't think they are, to be honest, needing any nerfs. So let's take a look at Abysscraft. So in Abyss, it's interesting, right? Because Abyss have got quite a few ways of playing now. They can play out as aggro, they can play out as sort of mid-range builds, and then they can play things like the mode Abyss, or they can play quite deep into kind of control. I mean, I do think that Jinsetsu is about as good a card as you can have, in terms of like without breaking the power level. Like this card is phenomenal in the sense that it doesn't need an Evo to do what it's doing. Now, I think before the Mode Abyss came out, it was like just at the right level. But I think when mode's gone off, so when Sanacha basically has enabled you to get the additional mode. In other words, when you can select both these modes at the same time, I feel like this card is just so busted that it's not costing you an Evo point to destroy 4 followers, restore your health, and fill the board. That I know you've had to meet the mode condition, but that is like absolutely bonkers powerful. So I mean, I like Jinsetsu, and it is it's an expensive card, don't get me wrong. You can't play it before turn 9. But I do think that it is particularly powerful. I'm not sure how much longer it can last, to be honest. And then the other card, which has obviously been top tier since set 1, is Cerberus. And yeah, I mean, I just wonder whether it should only bring back 1 instead of 2. That's what I'm wondering. Is Super Evo do this 2 times? What if it only did it once? And then again, instead of being able to do 8 damage essentially from hand, you'd only be able to do 6 damage from hand, because you could kind of get 1 less. And similarly with heal, I feel like something like that is kind of like the type of nerf I'd like to see on a Cerberus. But other than that, I mean, don't forget Abyss struggled, particularly in set 1, whereas now I think it's pretty up there, potentially tier 1 actually at the minute. It's really good. I think that's really it for now. I don't feel compelled to to make any major nerfs in this set, but I think that's the big one at the minute. Okay, next up we got Havencraft. Haven is tricky because it's possibly my favorite class, to be honest, and yet it really struggled in the first 2 sets. Obviously we got Ward Haven in set 2, and then we started to see a bit more play. It was maybe the weakest class in set 1, between that and Dragon, I think. But set 2, Ward kind of gave it this fun way of playing, but it was never tier 1. never tier 1. It was competitive and it was interesting. And then set 3's come out, and of course, we have now got the Crest Haven. And I suppose the biggest one that people are going to call out in terms of things like a nerf is the Maddening Benison. This card is pretty insane because now we are able to get 5 crests down pretty easily, right? So in other words, we can just play this as costing 2, restore 10 defense. And because there's no space in the crests, you never get this last words drama of losing 10 damage a couple of turns later. So I think that something needs to change around it. I think that, you could do really incremental stuff like just say restore 8 damage, maybe even restore 6 or 7. I think if it went lower than that, it just probably would kind of lose the identity of the card. Like, the identity is meant to be this like last chance card, isn't it? So that's definitely one thing that you could do. I don't know how you get around the idea that we can currently negate this 10 damage. Maybe it should say something like, maybe it has to become a crest in order to restore the 10 defense. That's the other way of looking at it. So like right now it's almost like a spell or a fanfare, the restore, but maybe like if you can't play the crest, then you don't get the 10 defense. So it could be something like you play it and then the crest says, at the end of the turn this is played, restore 10 defense, and then it says last words, deal 10 damage. So that's one way. Or the other way, I think, would just be to reduce the keep it as it is, but just reduce the amount of defense that it heals. Maybe make it around 6, 7, like 8 max, but probably 6 or 7 is what I'd suggest. Other than that, I think that it is a little bit early to go ahead and just straight up nerf Marwyn. One way you could nerf Marwyn is to change the Torrent of Despair, for example. This thing where it says delay the counts of all your crests by 1, you could get rid of that. Or you could make Torrent cost more, 3 or 4 maybe. Because right now you've got this thing where you play Congruent of Repose on 5, and then you can play Marwyn on 4 for 4, and then you've got 2 left. So on turn 6 you can play Marwyn and you can play the Torrent, whereas if the Torrent costs 3, you at least wouldn't be able to do that combo. So I think potentially this card's going to get touched. But at the minute, honestly, I think it's such a new way of playing that I don't want to see massive nerfs to it. The biggest thing probably would be the Maddening Benson. Other things that people have talked about is things like, I think Wilbert's a very good card, but it's got the obvious counter with Odin. So depending what you do to Odin depends. Like, if you nerfed Odin, then Wilbert suddenly gets a lot better. Again, I think it's easy to talk about these things as individuals, but you need to think about what else you're nerfing. The other one is Unholy Vessel. Some people think that this card is just absolutely bonkers and could easily cost 7. I agree, it could cost 7. I'm not against keeping it for 6 for now, but I could see in the future it may be going up to 7 if it proves to be very, very dominant. Other than that, I think Lapis in a game where Banish exists, I think is fine. And Jean, who is one of my favorite Haven cards, I don't think it's busted though. I think it's got a good ability, so I think it's fine. So for me, I think they're the major changes that I would want to see in the class at the minute. And that just leaves Portal. Portal's in a bit of a weird spot at the minute because the original artifact builds kind of dropped off. And part of that is to do with the fact that, you've got all this kind of heal, making it really difficult to sort of get in range where something like the Master Cop is going to actually, be able to deal 10 to 13 damage and win. Orcus was supremely powerful in the first couple of sets, but again, has really dropped off as the class has dropped off. I don't think it's that Orcus has dropped off, though. I think it is the class has dropped off. So I fully expect this card to make a comeback in a top-tier meta deck near you soon. So definitely we could be coming back to talk about Orcus. But right now, I don't think that this deck needs many sort of nerfs, if I'm honest with you. I think the biggest target for a nerf would have been something like Alouette, certainly from the first 2 sets. But like I say, with Masterwork dropping off a little bit, I'm not sure you really need to nerf Alouette. So personally, in this month's balance patch, I don't feel like we need to see too much nerfed in terms of this class. So yeah, overall, guys, like I say, there are tons of buffs that they could make taking those unplayable cards and maybe just giving them a few more points of power, or make them a bit cheaper. But overall, I think the nerfs that we've talked about today would really, really help. And I think the primary thing that's wrong with the game right now is just too little impact when it comes to owning the board. Like, owning the board should be worth a lot more, and that's because we've got a ton of heal in the game and we've got a ton of storm damage that can be done from hand. And I think storm really needs looking at. I think any card that can storm, they really need to look at, but they probably need to look at it across the board. They probably don't just want to look at it in isolation. The easiest one in isolation is Odin, right? Because it's a neutral card and it unlocks a lot of these tactics where you can just win from hand. So I think Odin needs changing, but outside of that, I think they could probably do with just looking across the board at Storm and saying, are we happy with this? Like, when these cards are played, what's happening to the win rate? Obviously, they've got the data that we haven't got, but my suspicion is that Storm is ruling the roost right now. Anyway, let me know what you think, guys, in the comments. Thanks again for hanging out and listening to me ramble on. Appreciate all the support with the channel as ever. We're climbing up to 4.3k followers now, which is awesome. If you've not joined the gang yet, then feel free to do so. Appreciate it as always. And I'll see you guys very soon for some more Shadowverse Worlds Beyond. Take care of yourself.